Well, perhaps the best known and most respected figure in the field is Ed Riley, the director of the Center for Behavioral Teratology at San Diego State University. He's as likely to be traveling the globe, briefing world health officials and conducting research as he is spending the weekend at a camp for kids with FAS. Kathy and I caught up with Ed to get his thoughts on all things FASD. Well, we're here with Ed Riley. Ed, good to see you. What are you doing in Washington?
Well, it's good to see you guys. It's been a while, so it's good to be here. I was here for an interagency coordinating committee on FASD out in Rockville at the NIAAA building. So.
I know that the CDC has pretty good data on the number of pregnant women who are heavy and binge drinkers. And I think of the roughly 4 million or so births in the U.S. each year, over 100,000 women are heavy and binge drinkers, not any alcohol. That's certainly a concern.
It's a large number, particularly when you can consider that, we know that a large percent of those women who are drinking heavily are going to have kids with FAS. I mean, the numbers vary, but it's probably 30 to 40% may have a child with a fetal alcohol syndrome. And then those that don't are going to have kids who have cognitive and intellectual, behavioral problems. Not that every kid's going to be affected, but a substantial number of those offspring are going to have problems. Just that clumsy kid in school may not get labeled with an ARND, but you just don't know whether it was the result of that alcohol exposure or not. When you're drinking, how much you're drinking, are all going to determine the outcome.
And here's another cost that's probably impossible to measure for, but the emotional cost of both moms and dads of knowing that there was alcohol exposure, and here now we have a child with whatever school problems or behavioral problems or maybe physical issues, that worry and remorse that there's a possibility it could have been linked to drinking during pregnancy. And we talk to those folks every day here at NOFAS, and that's not an easy cross to bear.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, that's one of the reasons that I recommend that women not drink during pregnancy at all. Even if they don't believe that low amounts of alcohol are going to be damaging. If your child was born with an effect and you had anything to drink while you were pregnant, you're going to sit there forever and ever and ever and just wonder whether or not you might have been the cause of that problem.
Whether it does or not, and that's the thing,
And 4% of kids are born with problems. 5% of kids are ADHD, and so it's a cross to bear that I wouldn't want to have to do. Yeah. And if you don't drink, you don't need to worry about it. The problem is that when people try to establish how much is safe, when we talk about thresholds, they're talking about thresholds for populations. They're not talking about thresholds for individual people. And so the genetics of an individual, how maybe alcohol prone or sensitive they are, that can all have an impact. When they drank, it can all influence the outcome. And so for any individual person, their thresholds are irrelevant. It's just, that's a population measure. It doesn't tell you what's safe for you or what's not. We all know women who drink a lot, who have kids who appear perfectly normal, and you just wonder, well, obviously it didn't have an effect. Well, maybe there's something particular about that woman that was preventative, that provided some defense.
And how would you quantify a birth defect that you weren't aware of, that was subtle?
I mean, you don't. And we know that there are genetic factors that play into this. I mean, with animal studies, you can show that you can selectively breed animals who are more sensitive to alcohol, and the ones who are more sensitive have, if you give them alcohol when they're pregnant, have offspring that are much more affected than the ones who aren't.
Really? Wow.
So, something we say all the time, and I always find myself falling back on sort of, I think, the common sense approach. I mean, we know that alcohol is a neurotoxin, right? We know it's a teratogen. Why would you want to expose your embryo or fetus to any amount of a toxic substance? We get so upset about lead in children's toys or anything like that.
If it was something else besides alcohol, they'd be clamoring to ban this
substance. That's right. Don't prevent me from my beloved alcohol.
But some chemical shows up in a baby bottle, and that chemical's been linked to estrogen levels, and people get rampant about that fact. And for alcohol, it's, well, how much is safe?
Right, right.
You know.
And of course, it's like, well, how much? You know, when you say drink a lot, drink a little, I mean, you know, that's subjective. I mean, this mug filled with alcohol may be a good night drink to one person, may put another person in a coma, you know.
You know, I want to ask you another question that among researchers has been on their mind, and that's out at NIH, the National Institute on Alcohol Abuse and Alcoholism, one of the institutes there. There is a plan to abolish NIAAA. What do you make of that?
Well, they're talking about making a new institute to study addictions. And from the perspective of studying fetal alcohol, this is not always a disorder of an addicted person. I mean, fetal alcohol happens in women who drink. And so I think if they turn it into an addictions institute, that fetal alcohol syndrome would get lost in that institute. There's talk about moving it into another institute at NIH. But I think it's really hard to see how one studies the child in the absence of the mother. If you have a mother who has an alcohol problem and therefore is having a child with fetal alcohol syndrome, I think we need to learn how to deal with the mother. Prevention of fetal alcohol syndrome is getting that woman to stop drinking. And so I don't know how you disconnect the child from the mother, as that which would happen if the fetal alcohol went to another NIH institute.
It seems like there's also sort of a movement towards bundling issues into research grants and projects. That could marginalize the focus on the issue too, right?
Yeah, I think so. I think that we have a system that's functioning very well, and I think has made significant progress on all fronts of alcohol research. And now to try to do away with that and talk about addictions. I mean, within NIAAA, people do study moderate drinking. There's study some of the health benefits that have been proposed for low dose alcohol exposure. That would not be covered anymore, and I think that they're all important areas of research that need to be continued.
But that's not during pregnancy.
No.
Yeah,
No,
I think it's like some of the liver studies, the metabolic research. There's so much that NIAAA does. Not even half could be characterized as addiction research. And I think that Director Collins, Francis Collins, is sort of on the record previously having said that he was surprised at how dissimilar the sort of illicit drug and alcohol research is. So, this is something that NOFAS is very concerned about.
We're very concerned too, because I think it'll affect the research ongoing in the field of fetal alcohol. So I'm concerned.
I can't think of anyone who has made a greater impact in educating the world about FASD than Ed Riley. It's not only his compelling research, but also his ability to reach any audience. I once saw him present to a gathering of individuals with FASD. He got a standing ovation because he respectfully and carefully discussed FASD in a way that was both interesting and helpful. He has the unique ability to translate very complex information about brain development and behavior to any audience. What always comes through with Ed is his genuine care for individuals who live with FASD and their families. Ed has never turned me or anyone else down when asked to speak with a family member who sometimes are desperate for information.
The legal and criminal justice issues encompassing FASD are getting increasing attention lately. This month there was an FASD continuing legal education session at the American Bar Association's biannual meeting. And this comes on the heels of last year's FASD double issue of the Journal of Psychiatry and Law. The journal included over 20 articles on the various facets of FASD in the criminal justice system. NOFAS held a press conference here in Washington featuring many of the authors, as well as the editor of the special issues, Billy Edwards. Edwards, a Los Angeles County public defender, summed up the issues facing individuals with FASD in criminal settings.
I realized there were more and more people who were being diagnosed or should be diagnosed with fetal alcohol spectrum disorder. I noticed the behaviors, I noticed that they had impulse control problems. I also realized the behavior problems. And a lot of these people did not have the facial features that a full-blown fetal alcohol syndrome patient will have, but they had the behavior problems, and they also had the brain damage. And in a lot of these cases, I worked with many of these experts that published in the journal, and our goal was to be able to bring public awareness and public perception from judges, prosecutors, defense lawyers, and mental health professionals about why fetal alcohol spectrum disorder is such an important topic in the criminal justice system. A case that I worked on in Los Angeles, the client was charged with armed robbery, and he had a prior, what's called a strike as a child. He admitted to a prior armed robbery as a child. And when I got the case, one of the things that I realized in his birth records was he was prenatally exposed to cocaine. So with that case, I immediately thought about fetal alcohol spectrum disorder, thinking that maybe the mom also drank during the time of pregnancy if she was also ingesting cocaine. So I had a neurologist in Los Angeles evaluate the client. He said, you know, the client was prenatally exposed to cocaine. So I then immediately thought, you know, let's try to find mom. Let's try to find the birth mother. Well, the birth mother was on the streets, and she was a prostitute. We tracked her down. We talked to her. At first, she was in complete denial of drinking, and it took us about 4 or 5 meetings with her until she finally realized that what we were trying to do was trying to help her son. So she admitted, she says, you know, when I wasn't getting high on the cocaine, I didn't have money for cocaine, I would drink alcohol, and I would drink tequila. And she admitted to drinking during the entire pregnancy. Well, we ended up getting experts appointed, and we got the fetal alcohol spectrum disorder diagnosis. And one of the things was, when I went back and told the client, you know what, you have behavior problems, and you have brain damage, and you have problems with ADHD and impulsivity and hyperactivity because your mom drank during pregnancy. And he said to me, he said, you know, Billy, I always knew there was something wrong with me because the kids would make fun of me, but I just didn't really know what it was, and now I know. Many people, or most people with fetal alcohol syndrome spectrum disorder, don't understand cause and effect. So they don't understand the consequences of their behavior. They don't learn from their mistakes in the past, and they keep committing crimes that other people may not do. They commit a crime, and then they do it again because they're not able to rational and realize because of the brain damage that they have. They also don't understand why that when they get interviewed by the police that they often have a right to not speak to them. But just like people with intellectual disabilities, people with fetal alcohol syndrome spectrum disorder also want to please authoritative figures. They're very gullible, and they will often confess to crimes that they didn't commit because they want to please the police officer. They're told that police officers are our friends. So people with fetal alcohol spectrum disorder will often talk to police and make confessions, even to crimes they did not commit.
You often hear in the media about individuals with FASD breaking the law. What you don't hear is how they are victimized in their own communities and within the judicial system as well. Darla Stewart at the Arc of Aurora, Colorado, is a leader in this area. She's behind legislation in the state that would allow an individual with a developmental disability to provide their own testimony when they are victims of crime. Shockingly, most courts don't allow this. So this is an important development that we'll be following. In addition to the recent FASD training at the ABA conference, the ABA is considering an FASD resolution similar to the one approved by the Canadian Bar Association. It urges government to ensure resources for both training and education, and laws and policies to recognize FASD and provide appropriate support at all levels of the justice system.
The legislation and resolution are very important. I know that Eileen Bisgard at NOFAS Colorado is involved in both of these efforts.
And Howard Davidson at the ABA is an important ally as well.
Well, there it is. There's the first edition of NOFAS Now. We hope you found it informative and interesting. Next time, we'll have a feature on the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention and their important FASD efforts.
Join us again for the next edition of NOFAS Now.